I thought I had the perfect family, a loving wife, and adorable kids. But when I discovered that my children were not my biological offspring, my whole world shattered. Jack Thompson was born into a modest family in a small town in North Carolina. His father worked long hours as a mechanic, and his mother was a school teacher from an early age. Jack displayed a knack for leadership, often stepping up to defend classmates from bullies or rally as friends for impromptu baseball games. The small-town values of honesty, loyalty, and resilience shaped him deeply. By the time Jack graduated high school, he was set on joining the Marines, inspired by an uncle who had served in Vietnam. He wanted to protect others and see the world. His parents were initially hesitant, but eventually supported his decision, proud of his determination. Boot camp was grueling, but Jack thrived under the discipline and structure quickly, earning respect among his peers. During his early years in the Marines, Jack's life took a pivotal turn. Stationed in Okinawa, Japan, he found himself in the thick of a tense hostage situation. His calm demeanor, and quick thinking during the negotiation earned him a commendation, as well as a newfound interest in law enforcement. The experience planted the seeds for his dream of becoming a detective. When his tour ended, Jack returned stateside with a clear goal. He enrolled in a criminal justice program, juggling studies with a part-time job as a security guard. His time in college was marked by rigorous studies, sessions, late-night shifts, and growing camaraderie with fellow students who shared his ambition. Among them was Emily, a short, ambitious business major who quickly caught his eye. Emily was everything Jack admired. Intelligent, witty, and fiercely driven, she had dreams of working in corporate finance and was relentless in her pursuit of success. Despite their different career paths, they bonded over a shared love of classic films and long walks in the park. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a simple courthouse wedding just before their graduation ceremonies. Shortly after their marriage, life moved quickly. Jack secured a position as the emergency dispatcher while awaiting entry into the police academy, and Emily landed a coveted role at a prestigious investment firm. They rented a cozy apartment in the suburbs, balancing the excitement of their budding careers with the challenges of building a life together. It was during this time that Emily's frequent work trips to the East Coast began, trips that would later intertwine fatefully with Jack's path. Jack relaxed on the patio, glancing at the door as he waited for Emily, his wife of nearly 20 years. Affectionately called Julie. Across from him sat Laura Johnson, a close friend and co-worker. Jack exhaled a puff of smoke, stubbed out his cigarette, sipped his coffee, and lit another. "How are you holding up, Jack?" Laura asked, gently. He shook his head. "Not great, but I'm glad you're here. That's what friends are for," she replied warmly. Jack's thoughts drifted back. 22 years. Newly married. He just left the Marines where he served as a military police officer, dreaming of becoming a detective. He used his benefits to study criminal justice. In college, where he met Emily, a business student, the connection was instant. Jack's commanding presence and Emily's charm made them inseparable. They married. After graduation, Emily, 5 years younger, had been briefly engaged before meeting Jack. She shared little about her ex who moved to New York, and Jack didn't ask during his Marine days. Jack was a free spirit, but Emily changed that she was the one after the wedding. Jack waited 6 months to join the police academy, working as the emergency dispatcher. In the meantime, Emily started a career at a national investment firm together. They managed to rent a modest apartment and were happy. Her job required occasional East Coast trips, which Jack disliked. But one break brought big news. Emily was pregnant. Their son, Lucas, was born shortly after Jack graduated from the academy. 2 years later, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. Theodore was about 13 years old. I grew up without her side. Sophie arrived. After a difficult birth, Emily convinced Jack to get a vasectomy. Both children inherited Emily's blonde hair and blue eyes, prompting Jack's mother to want Suggest a DNA test. Jack refused, firmly trusting Emily 5 years into his career. Jack excelled in the detective exam, earning a swift promotion with Emily's income. They upgraded to a cozy 3-bedroom home in a nice neighborhood. Life seemed perfect at one of Emily's company. Christmas parties held at a Marriott. Jack met Ryan Anderson, a New York manager. Ryan's blonde hair and blue eyes bore an uncanny resemblance to Emily's unsettling. "Jack, it's great to meet you," Ryan said, shaking Jack's hand. "I hear you made detective." "Congrats." "Thanks," Jack replied, wary of Al's smug demeanor. Ryan smirked. "Julie, didn't tell you. We were engaged in high school before I moved to New York." "I see," Jack said evenly. "It's good to finally meet you." Ryan added, "Heard you earned a silver star in Iraq." Jack nodded curtly. "Just doing my duty." Al's smile lingered. "The stronger man won, I guess." Jack stayed composed. "This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside." The encounter left a lasting impression. Jack spent the evening watching Emily closely, especially when she danced with Ryan. While nothing about their interaction was overtly inappropriate, Jack couldn't shake the unease. Ryan's presence stirred at the end of the night. Ryan made a point of saying goodbye. "It was wonderful to see you again, Julie," he said warmly, then turned to Jack. "In a real pleasure meeting you, sir." "Likewise," Jack replied, his tone. The car ride home was tense until Jack broke the silence. "Was that the guy you were engaged to before we met?" Emily hesitated before answering softly. "Yes, that was him." "Don't you think it might have been important to tell me you work with your ex-fiancé?" Jack asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "HEK based in New York." "Jack," she explained. "We hardly see each other and he's in a different department. But you're right. I should have told you. I'm sorry." Jack sighed, his tone softening. "It's okay. So what happened between you two?" Emily smiled faintly. "I wanted a family. Marriage. Kids. A home. He didn't. When he moved to New York, he made it clear he wasn't ready to settle down. That's when I ended it." "Do you regret it?" Jack asked. "Not at all," she said, her smile brightening. "I had everything I've ever wanted." She took his hand and kissed his knuckles. "And right now," she said, affectionately, "I'd love for you to take me to bed." Jack chuckled, his earlier unease fading. "Your wish is my command." After that night, Ryan didn't come up again. Emily's business trips continued, but Jack never noticed anything to suggest she was unfaithful. She remained devoted, and their life together flourished over time. Jack met other colleagues from Emily's office, but none unsettled him. Like Ryan, Jack, a seasoned police officer, and now a lieutenant, prided himself on his keen observational skills. Yet something about Emily's workplace occasionally nagged at him. Her colleagues were always polite, but there was a subtle tension in their demeanor among them. Megan stood out. Years earlier, Megan and her husband had witnessed a robbery that Jack resolved, and they had testified courageously in court. Since then, Jack occasionally checked in on her recently. However, Megan's behavior had changed at events. Her glances seemed strained, carrying a quiet unease, similar to what Jack had noticed in others at Emily's workplace. At first, he dismissed it, but a growing sense of discomfort lingered in the back of his mind. One day, determined to get to the ball jack of things, Jack decided to visit Emily's office. Unannounced as he walked in, Megan intercepted him. Before he could reach Emily's desk, Emily just stepped out. She said quickly. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Do you know when she'll be back?" She mentioned needing to drop something off at the legal department. "It might take a while," Megan replied, her tone hesitant. Jack studied her. "Is everything okay, Megan? How are you and your husband doing?" "We're fine," she said, then hesitated before blurting, "But I'm curious. Did you know Julie was seeing Ryan while she was back east?" Jack froze, his SJACH tightened. "That's not true." Why would you ask something like that? Megan avoided his gaze. I just assumed you knew you to have an open marriage. Right. Because of your injury. Jack frowned. His confusion deepening. What injury? Megan's face paled slightly. She said you were injured on duty and couldn't, you know. Jack's expression darkened. Megan, I've never been injured on duty. And I'm fine if you have something to back up these claims. Now would be the time to share. After a long pause, Megan nodded. I have photos on my phone. I took them during one of our trips east. I thought you should know. Jack handed her his card, scribbling his email on the back. Send them to me. Megan nodded. Solemnly. I've seen them together multiple times. It's been going on for years. For how long? Jack asked. His voice a mix of anger and disbelief. 5, maybe 6 years. Megan admitted. Quietly. Jack jaw tightened. Keep this between us. Don't tell Julie. I was here. Of course. Megan replied. I'll send the photos now. Jack left the office, his mind racing. Had Julia really been unfaithful all these years? He tried to replay the past, searching for signs he might have missed. But nothing stood out. She had always seemed devoted, calling him nightly during her trips and showing no obvious changes in her demeanor. But now he questioned everything. Minutes later, his phone buzzed with Megan's email. The photos were clear and devastating. One showed Emily and Ryan locked in a passionate kiss on the dance floor. Another captured Ryan's hand on her bare thigh, beneath a skirt Jack didn't recognize. The final image hit him the hardest. Emily and Ryan entering an elevator, her face tilted toward his, her expression unmistakably filled with longing. Jack's chest tightened and then tears blurred his vision. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd ever imagined. Back at his office, Jack found it impossible to concentrate. The crime board on the wall, a tool that usually brought him clarity, seemed meaningless. Now, after a futile attempt to work, he decided to call it a day. As he was leaving, a fellow detective caught sight of him. You doing okay, Lieutenant? The detective asked. Concerned, Jack forced a faint smile. Just some heartburn. See you, Jack, or row at home. Jack grabbed a beer and powered up his computer, checking Emily's calendar. He noticed her next trip east was scheduled in 2 days and would last a week. He transferred the photos from his phone to his computer and enhanced them, zooming in to scrutinize Al's face. His chest tightened as realization dawned. The resemblance was undeniable. Pulling out photos of Lucas and Sophie, Jack compared them side by side with the image of Al. Lucas could have been Al's twin, and even Sophie shared striking similarities. Fighting back a wave of nausea, Jack steadied himself. He knew what had to be done. Without hesitation, he contacted a DNA testing service and arranged to pick up a kit that same day. Just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. The caller had showed Emily's name. Hutch answered, keeping his voice calm despite the turmoil churning inside. Hey, Emily said, her tone concerned. Are you okay? You sound a little off. I'm fine, he replied, evenly, masking his unease. Just dealing with a tough case and some SJAK-CH issues. What up? I'll be working late tonight to prepare for the trip, Emily explained. We're going out for dinner afterwards, so I won't be home until late. Probably after 11. Can you handle the kids? Of course, Jack said, his tone steady. Thanks so much, she said with audible relief. Make sure they're in bed by 9:30. They've got tests, Jack or Ro. Will do, Jack assured her. You're the best, Emily said, warmly. Love you. Love you too, Jack replied before ending the call. As he set the phone down, Jack realized the hardest part of this ordeal wouldn't be finding the truth, but pretending nothing was wrong. Truly deceived him for their entire marriage. He would need to handle this methodically, like any investigation. Calm, objective, and thorough. That evening, he picked up the DNA kit and returned home before the kids arrived. He hated the deception, but knew he'd need to collect the samples after they were asleep to avoid raising suspicion. For now, the truth would have to wait. Scrolling through his contacts, Jack found the name he needed. David Dunlay. David, a former detective, had retired and moved back to New York to run a private investigation firm specializing in infidelity cases. Hoping to catch him in his office, Jack dialed the number Dunleavy and Associates. David answered his familiar voice. Brisk, but friendly. David. You old dog, Jack said, forcing a chuckle. Jack Thompson. Long time. No here. David replied warmly. What's new? Not much, Jack said, striving to keep his tone casual. How's business busy? David said with a laugh. Turns out there are plenty of wandering spouses out there. What's going on? Finally, decided to ditch the force and join the private sector. Not quite, Jack replied, but I might have a job for you if you're willing to take it. David's tone shifted, becoming serious. Jack, then, you're not about to tell me. You think Emily's cheating? Are you? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Jack admitted, his voice weighted with emotion. And if I'm right, it's been happening for years. Damn. Jack. That's rough, David said, his sympathy evident. What do you mean? She'll be in New York for a week, starting Friday, Jack explained. I'll send you her itinerary along with photos of her and the guy. I suspect you want the works. David asked. Photos, video, audio, a full report. Everything, Jack said, firmly. I need to know everything. David paused before responding. Jack, you've had my back more times than I can count. Just cover my expenses and we'll call it even. I don't want to take advantage, Jack said. Don't argue with me, David replied, his New York accent thick. You do the same for me. Jack couldn't help but smile. Thanks, David. You're a good friend. David chuckled. Now you're catching on. Send me your details and photos, and I'll take care of the rest. I'll send them over tonight. Jack promised. Thanks again. Anytime, buddy. We'll talk soon, David said before hanging up just as the call ended. The kids came home from school. Pizza for dinner, Jack asked as they walked through the door. Yeah. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in my country's side. Mom's going away again, isn't she? Lucas asked. She leaves Friday and will be gone for a week. Jack confirmed a whole week, Sophie said, her tone laced with sarcasm. Yes, a week, Jack said, ignoring the attitude. So behave yourselves. Remember, I'm armed and I've got handcuffs. He joked, earning laughter from both kids. He ordered pizza and they ate together in the living room while watching TV. As they finished, Jack asked, Are you ready for Jack or Rose tests? Almost, Sophie said. Lucas nodded. Well, listen to this. You should hit the books before bed, Jack suggested. Mom lets us stay up until 10 before tests, Lucas protested. Nice try, Jack said with a smirk. Lights out at 9. Shouldn't it be lights out at 900? Sophie teased. You're absolutely correct, Jack replied with mock authority. Moving. The kids grabbed their books and headed upstairs. Watching them go, Jack felt a pang of sadness. They were great kids, and he loved them deeply. He just hoped the truth when it came out wouldn't tear their world apart. Back in his office, Jack pulled out a blank notebook, determined to treat the situation like a professional case. If he was going to uncover the truth, he needed to keep detailed records. He began by jotting down everything Megan had told him, and printing out the photos she'd sent carefully, attaching them to the pages. Next, he added pictures of Lucas and Sophie, lining them up beside the enhanced images of Ryan. The resemblance was undeniable beneath the photos. He wrote a single word: paternity. He opened his calendar and began cross-referencing Emily's quarterly trips with the timelines of both pregnancies. The dates matched perfectly to be coincidence. His mind drifted back to their conversation after the party where he'd met Al. Emily's words echoed bitterly in his head. I have everything a girl could dream of. Yeah. Jack muttered under his breath. Everything. A life in New York with him and a fool at home. Raising your kids. His jaw tightened. Damn you. Julie. By 9:45 p.m. He closed the notebook and locked it securely in his desk drawer. Taking the DNA test kit, he quietly checked on the kids. Their lights were off, and both were sound asleep. Moving with care, he collected the necessary DNA samples, kissed each of them on the forehead, and ensured they were tucked in before leaving their rooms. Quiet of his study, Jack added his own DNA sample to the kit, filled out the accompanying paperwork, and packed everything into his briefcase. Leaning back in his chair, he let his thoughts race. If Emily had been unfaithful, divorce was inevitable. But what would come next? Custody battles, child support, alimony. These questions loomed large. And what about the possibility of fraud? If Emily had knowingly listed him as the father, while knowing Ryan might be the biological parent, could she be held accountable? The hell have you done, Julie? He whispered into the stillness. Jack climbed into bed, but couldn't sleep when Emily came home just before midnight. He was still wide awake. You're still up? She asked, sitting beside him. Couldn't sleep, he said curtly. Do you want to talk about it's the case I'm working on? He lied. A guy comes home, finds out his whole marriage was a lie and discovers the kids he's been raising aren't his. Oh my God, Emily said, her hand flying to her mouth. What happened? Jack feigned anger. He eliminated her. Then the kids. Then himself. She stared at him. Horrified, that poor man. Jack glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I can't even imagine how he must have felt after a pause. Emily leaned closer. You know I love you, right? She asked softly. Yeah, Jack replied. And you believe me? Of course, he said, without hesitation. Good, she said, her tone lightening. By the way, I'm leaving a day early. I'll head out Jack or Ro instead. But why? Jack asked, unable to hide his surprise. I need to settle a few things before the meetings start. I left my itinerary on the kitchen table. Jack forced a nod, masking his irritation. I was hoping to spend some time with you before you left. I'm sorry, she said, heading to the bathroom. I really need a shower. As soon as the door closed, Jack grabbed her purse and fished out her phone. He tried her usual passcode, but it didn't work. She changed it. When did you change this? He muttered, his unease growing, setting the phone back. He rifled through her purse. His fingers brushed against a small box and he pulled it out. Flamby. The label read, Emergency Contraceptive. Jack's jackets each dropped. Emily had always said she stayed on birth control for health reasons, but this was something else entirely. His mind raced through implications. There was no reason for her to have this, unless she was hiding something. He snapped a photo of the box with his phone carefully, turned it to her purse and crawled back into bed. When Emily emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp and fragrant with lavender soap, she slipped into bed beside him, snuggling close. Normally, Jack would have held her, pulling her into his arms, but tonight he turned away, inching toward the edge of the mattress. Startled by his rejection, Emily withdrew her confusion. Palpable in the dim light, he could feel her staring at his back. Does he know? She wondered, tears stinging her eyes. But she said nothing, and neither did he. The silence between them was deafening the next morning. Jack was distant and cold. He avoided speaking to Emily as she packed, instead immersing himself in his usual routine. After showering, shaving and dressing, he poured himself coffee and spotted the itinerary she had left on the kitchen counter. Picking it up, he studied it briefly before tucking it into his briefcase. Without a word, he walked the kids to school, keeping his face impassive. When he returned home, Emily was waiting by the door. Aren't you going to kiss me goodbye? She asked, her voice almost pleading. Jack paused, his hand on the doorknob. Turning, he met her gaze for a long moment. Call me when you get there, he said, flatly. "Jack, I really do love you," she said, her tone soft and insistent. He replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "I know." He opened the door and left, leaving her standing there, confused and hurt. "This must be weighing on him more than I thought," she reasoned. Once at his desk, Jack scanned her itinerary and forwarded it along with the photos of her and Al to David. He also dropped off the DNA samples for processing and scheduled a meeting with Rachel Green, a no-nonsense divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics. If it came to that, Jack wanted to be prepared for whatever lay ahead, determined to stay productive. Jack tried to refocus on his work for a while. It seemed like he had regained a sliver of control until his phone buzzed with a call from Captain Johnson. "Thompson, get to my office now." Johnson barked. Jack let out a weary sigh rising from his desk as he walked through the precinct. His colleagues exchanged questioning glances, sensing something was off entering the captain's office. Jack closed the door as instructed and took a seat. Johnson leaned against his desk, his arms folded. The normally gruff captain's tone was uncharacteristically gentle. "Okay, Jack, what's going on?" Jack hesitated before speaking. "I think my wife is cheating on me," he admitted, quietly. Johnson's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but he waited patiently for more. Jack exhaled deeply, the words tasting bitter as he said them. "And it's not just recent. I believe it's been happening for our entire marriage. There's a chance, a real chance. The kids might not even be mine." Johnson's expression darkened as he ran a hand over his face. "Jesus, Jack, I don't even know what to say." "I'm sorry. I've already got wheels in motion," Jack said. "I've hired a private investigator, set up a DNA test, and I'm meeting with Rachel Green this afternoon." "Good," Johnson said with a nod. "You're doing the right thing. But you should also talk to Drive Wilkerson, the department psychologist," Jack asked, his brows knitting together. "Yeah, you're one of my best. But this is a lot for anyone to handle. You need someone to help you process this, so it doesn't bleed into your work. Trust me on this." Reluctantly, Jack nodded. "All right. Thanks, Cap." Johnson offered a small, encouraging smile. "Okay, get through this, Jack. Just keep your priorities straight. Now get out of here before I start charging you rent for loitering." Jack gave a faint smirk and left the office, heading directly to Drive Donna Wilkerson's office. When he arrived, she greeted him with her signature warmth and a knowing look. "Well, Jack Thompson graces me with his presence. This must be serious." "It is," Jack replied, sinking into a chair. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." Donna listened intently as Jack detailed everything. His suspicions, the evidence, and his next steps. "But you don't have hard proof yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Jack said. "That's why I'm working with a private investigator and waiting on the DNA results." "Have you consulted a lawyer?" Donna asked. "Yes, Rachel Green." Donna nodded, approvingly. "Smart choice. But Jack, this isn't just about you. If your suspicions are confirmed, it's going to rock your kids' world. You're the only father they've ever known." "I've thought about that," Jack said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I've always taught them the importance of honesty. I can't keep this from them. If it's true." Donna placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Remember this. Jack, biology doesn't make a father. You're their dad, no matter what the test says." Jack gave a solemn nod. "Thanks, Donna. I won't forget that." Later that afternoon, Jack met with Rachel Green in her office. He laid everything on the table. The photos, his suspicions, the DNA test, and the private investigator's involvement. Rachel listened carefully, her sharp legal mind already piecing together a strategy. "Wait for the test results and the investigator's findings," she said. "If your suspicions are correct, this goes beyond infidelity. If she knowingly listed you as the father while suspecting otherwise, we could pursue charges of paternity fraud." "Paternity fraud? That's the thing," Jack asked. Surprised it is Rachel confirmed. And in this state, it's taken very seriously, depending on the details. We might even look at perjury if she's ever lied about this on the rough. Jack shook his head, overwhelmed by the implications. This is going to get messy. It already is, Rachel replied bluntly. But WEK handle it for now. Don't tip her off. Let her dig her own grave. Jack left the meeting feeling a mix of resolve and dread. When he got home, his phone rang. It was David. Hey Jack. How are you holding up? David asked. Jack sighed, sinking into a chair hanging in there. Julie's probably on her way to New York by now. I just met with my lawyer. We're holding off on any moves until the evidence comes in. Smart, David said. I managed to set up a camera in her hotel room. It's motion and voice activated, and it streams directly to a private server. I'll send you the IP address and login info so you can monitor it in real time. Jack grabbed the pen and jotted down the details. Thanks, David. I owe you. Forget it, David replied. I'll be tracking her when she lands. We'll touch base soon after hanging up. Jack immediately logged into the camera feed. The screen showed a blank room, pristine and untouched, but the sight of it filled him with a knowing and ease. Meanwhile, Julie sat by the airplane window, gazing out at the clouds. Her thoughts wandered back to the last 20 years on the surface. Her marriage to Jack seemed perfect. He was everything she thought she'd wanted. Strong, devoted, and an amazing father to their children. He had taught Lucas and Sophie life skills, instilled discipline, and shown them unconditional love. But even as Julie reflected on Jack's virtues, she couldn't escape the weight of her secret. She had convinced herself over the years that her actions were justified. Ryan had been her first love, and the chemistry they shared had never truly faded. His charisma and commanding presence had been intoxicating. Even after all these years, Ryan had always been clear about his disdain for fatherhood and commitment, which was why their engagement had fallen apart. But part of Julie had never stopped longing for him. When Ryan left for New York, she thought she'd moved on. Then Jack came into her life, a man who treated her like royalty and offered the stability. Ryan, never could she marry Jack, quickly determined to leave the past behind yet. The moment Ray entered her life, those old feelings resurfaced, bringing with them a dangerous temptation she could no longer ignore. Despite her life with Jack, Julie had never truly let Ryan go. Their connection rekindled shortly after she started at Apex Financials, a position she had secured, thanks to Ryan's glowing recommendation. Their affair reignited during her very first quarterly meeting in New York. Julie knew the stakes, but she meticulously crafted a facade to keep Jack oblivious. She called him nightly during her trips, ensured she looked flawless upon her return, and maintained the rhythm of their family life, as though nothing had changed. Julie had even orchestrated her pregnancies. While she and Jack had agreed she'd remain on birth control until they were ready for children, she had secretly stopped taking her pills before her trips to New York. She wanted Ryan's children, and made sure her plan succeeded. When Jack initiated closeness, during those times, she would feign an illness or claim to be on her period, avoiding any chance of conceiving with him. When Julie became pregnant with Lucas, Jack had been ecstatic. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Surprised, she explained the pregnancy as a rare failure of her birth control. And Jack believed her without question. Ryan, knowing the truth, had agreed to let Jack be Lucas' gay father in all but biology. The same pattern unfolded with Sophie's birth. After Sophie's complicated delivery, Julie persuaded Jack to get a vasectomy, citing her health as the priority. This removed any possibility of accidental conception with Jack, allowing her to carry on her affair without concern. For years, Julie and Ryan met discreetly during her quarterly trips. At first, they were cautious to avoid suspicion at work, but over time their closeness became harder to ignore. About 5 years ago, Megan, a newer member of Julie's team, confronted her after noticing the dynamic between her and Ryan. Julie, I'm just going to say it. Megan had pressed. Are you now involved? Julie didn't miss a beat. Crafting a lie on the spot. Yes, but it's not what you think. Jack knows we have an open marriage. He's fine with it. As long as it's kept out of town. Megan frowned. Skeptical. That doesn't sound like the Jack I've heard about. Julie sighed. Faking vulnerability. Jack was injured in the line of duty. It left him unable to. Well, you know, he's embarrassed about it. So please don't bring it up. It would devastate him. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Hesitant, Megan had reluctantly agreed to keep quiet, but the lie had left a sour taste in her mouth. Julie's thoughts were interrupted by the announcement that the plane was beginning its descent into LaGuardia. She straightened her seat, fastened her belt and prepared to land at home. Jack sat motionless in front of his computer, waiting for the live feed from the hotel room to activate. According to her itinerary, Julie's flight had already landed, and she should be arriving at the hotel soon. The screen flickered, and the camera came to life. Jack's heart sank as he saw Julie wheel her suitcase into the room. Moments later, Ryan entered behind her. Jack's hands clenched the desk as he studied the scene. Al's features were unmistakable. Lucas' gay face stared back at him. Aged to decades, he watched as Julie braced Ryan. The connection clear in every movement. His worst fears materialized in vivid details. The two kissed and fell onto the bed. Jack turned away from the screen. His SJACH churning for a moment. He composed himself, then forced himself to continue watching. He needed to see this through. When they were finished, Julie's voice cut through the silence. I really needed that. Same here, Ryan replied casually. So how's the deputy? Husband, don't call him that, Julie said sharply. Jack is a respected officer. Sure, Ryan said, smirking. Respected enough to have no clue. His wife's been sleeping with me for years. The guy's been raising my kids and he doesn't even know it. Maybe I should send him a Father's Day card. Don't you dare, Julie snapped, swatting his arm. Why do you have to be so cruel? When are you going to leave him? Ryan asked, his tone serious. Now, not until the kids are out of the house, Julie said. Maybe after Jack retires, that way I'll still get part of his pension. Ryan leaned back, studying her. I've been thinking, what if you transferred to my department? That way we could be together all the time. Julie hesitated, then said, maybe once the kids are older. Sophie's almost 17, so it won't be long. Ryan nodded. After all these years, what's another couple? But I'd like to meet the kids at some point. We agreed. Ryan, Julie said, firmly from the beginning. We decided you wouldn't have contact with them. I know, he said. But after the divorce, maybe, Julie conceded. Ryan glanced at his watch. We should get ready for dinner. We have a reservation. Julie stretched and stood. I'll shower and change. See you downstairs in Ryan an hour. See you then. Al said, pulling her close for another kiss. I love you. I love you too, Julie replied, using the same words she so often said to Jack, that frozen as if paralyzed. His worst suspicions were no longer just theories. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Fact. He watched as Ryan left the room, and Julie picked up her phone a moment later. His own phone buzzed. He stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello, he said, his voice flat. Hey. Jack just wanted to let you know I made it safely, Julie said, her tone cheerful. Good, Jack replied curtly. How's the case going? She asked. Making progress, he said. Bitterness barely veiled. I'm close to nailing down my main suspect. That's great, Julie said brightly. I know how much it's been weighing on. You have no idea, Jack muttered. Well, I was in with this. Well, I'm off to dinner now. But I'll call you Jack or Ro. Love you, she chirped. Jack's voice was emotional as is. Sure. I'll tell the kids you called. Ending the call. Jack stared at the blank screen. Julie's words echoed in his head. Hollow and meaningless. He had everything. He needed to confirm the truth. But for the first time, he wondered what his next move would be. Jack ensured the video was saved securely on his hard drive before shutting off the monitor. By the time he returned to the living room, Lucas and Sophie were home from school. Greeting them warmly, he masked the storm raging inside. His demeanor gave no hint of the unraveling truth he now carried. The following morning, Jack received a call from the DNA lab. The results were ready. He drove to the lab, picked up the sealed envelope and opened it in his car. The confirmation he feared hit him like a sledgehammer. Neither Lucas nor Sophie was biologically his. Despite the pain threatening to engulf him, he pulled himself together and headed straight to Rachel's green office. Clutching the DNA results and a copy of the video evidence, Rachel reviewed the documents meticulously. Before speaking, the DNA results are significant, she said. This gives a strong foundation. But the video, we can't use it in court. It wasn't obtained through legal means. Jack nodded, his expression grin. I figured as much. Even so, Rachel continued. We have enough to move forward. We'll file for divorce, citing infidelity and fraud. While this is a community property, state judges often consider infidelity during asset division. What about paternity fraud? Jack asked. That's a bit more complicated. Rachel admitted we need her to admit. She knowingly falsified the birth certificates. A confession, ideally, in front of witnesses, would bolster your case. I'll figure out a way to get her to admit it, Jack said. Determination hardening in his voice. Good. Come back on Wednesday and we'll plan our next steps. Rachel said that evening called as usual, her tone affectionate and sweet. Jack kept his responses brief, avoiding any declarations of love. After they ended the call, he turned back to his computer monitor. The feed showed Julie slipping into bed beside Al. His jaw tightened, but he continued watching, knowing the evidence would be invaluable. Later on Wednesday, Jack met with Rachel again. This time District Attorney Eric Davis and Deputy Laura Johnson joined the meeting. Eric laid out a clear plan. We need a conf, Eric said firmly. If she admits to falsifying the birth certificates, we can use that to build a stronger case. She's coming home Saturday morning, Jack said. I'll make sure the kids aren't in the house. Decor, Eric replied. We'll have Deputy Mills standing by to serve the divorce papers if necessary. Arrest her. Jack nodded, determined. Understood that evening when Julie called. Jack asked casually, You still planning to come back Saturday morning? Right. Yes, of course, she replied. Great, Jack said evenly. We should do something special when you're back. That sounds nice, she said. You know, I love and miss you. Right. I know, us in the first time, Jack replied, his tone neutral. You don't sound very convincing. She pressed. You haven't told me. You loved me all week. I loved you, Jack said, emphasizing the past tense. Good night. Julie hesitated but said good night before hanging up. She stared at her phone, her expression troubled. Jack smiled faintly, knowing her worry was just beginning that Friday. Jack packed bags for Lucas and Sophie and drove them to their grandparents' house. The children were confused and questioned why they couldn't stay home. Mom's coming back, Jack tomorrow morning, Lucas pointed out. I need to talk to her alone, Jack said, gently. I'll explain everything to you both in the afternoon. Sophie's voice wavered. Are you divorcing her? Please tell me. You're not. Jack's face softened, his heart ached. It's not something I can stop. Did you cheat on her? Sophie asked sharply. No, Jack said, firmly. I've never even thought about another woman during our marriage. Lucas frowned. So she cheated on you? Jack sighed. I'll explain everything, Jack wrote for now. Just trust me. The ride was silent, except for Sophie's quiet tears. When they arrived, Julie's mother, Susan, met them at the door. Concern etched across her face. What's going on? Jack, Susan asked. Why is Sophie crying? Jack rested a hand on her shoulder. I need to have a serious conversation with Julie. In the morning. Morning. I'll explain everything to you after. You're not going to her. Are you? Susan asked. Her tone. Larry, no. Jack said. Firmly. But there are things you need to know. You're divorcing her, aren't you? Susan pressed. Yes, Jack admitted. And for good reason. I'll explain. Jack O'Rourke. Susan reluctantly nodded. You'd better. That night, Jack watched the live feed. Julie sat beside Ryan, laughing as they talked. The sight stirred a storm of emotions, but he forced himself to stay composed. Picking up his phone, he dialed her number. Hi, Jack. Julie answered, her tone bright. Are you still on schedule to be home? Jack O'Rourke morning, he asked. Yes, she said. How's the case going? Almost wrapped up, Jack said by this time. Jack O'Rourke. The suspect will be in custody. Good. Julie said, cheerfully. Then maybe things will go back to normal. Maybe. Jack replied flatly. We'll talk in the morning. He ended the call and returned his gaze to the monitor. Julie stared at her phone, tears brimming in her eyes. Jack leaned back in his chair, a grim smile forming. Jack O'Rourke, he muttered. Everything changes. Jack O'Rourke. Jack stood on the back porch, finishing his cigarette as the sun began to rise at exactly 7:30. Then Laura arrived, stepping out of her patrol car with a determined expression together. They prepared for the confrontation, ensuring everything was ready by 7:45. Julie's car pulled into the garage. Jack watched silently as she walked toward the house, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. She pushed open the door, leading to the back deck. Jack, she called, her voice confused. What's going on? Who is this? And why is there a patrol car in the driveway? Where are the kids? Jack stood calmly. The kids are with your mother, he said evenly. This is Deputy Laura Johnson. Please have a seat. We need to talk. Julie glanced warily at Laura, then back at Jack. First, she said, dismissively, rushing past him. Not this time. Julie, Jack said, accent sharply, his tone broken. No argument. Sit down. We're doing this now. Startled by the force in his voice, Julie hesitated before reluctantly sitting down across from Laura. Jack took the chair at the head of the table, angled toward her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a digital recorder, and pressed the button before placing it on the table. I hope you don't mind if we record this conversation, Jack said, his voice calm, but unyielding given the circumstances. I think it's appropriate to advise of your rights. Julie's eyes widened, panic beginning to creep into her expression. What are you talking about? Jack's voice was firm. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. In a court of law, you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford, one will be appointed to you. Do you understand these rights? Julie stared at him, her voice trembling. I understand, but I'm not one of your suspects. Jack, I haven't done anything wrong. You are very much a suspect, Jack said coldly. In fact, you're my primary suspect. He pulled out the sheets of paper and slid them across the table. Do you recognize these? Julie glanced at the document, her brow furrowing. Yes, they're the kids' birth certificates. What's this about? For the record, Jack said evenly. Whose name is on the signature line? Mine, Julie replied. On both of them. Read the statement under your signature. Please, Jack instructed. Julie hesitated before reading aloud under penalty of perjury. I certify that the above is true and factual. And who is listed as the father? Jack asked, his voice tightening. Julie's eyes darted nervously between the papers and Jack. You are, she said, quietly. Read the name, Jack said. Ah, his tone. Steely. Julie swallowed hard. Thomas Jefferson Thompson, she said softly. Jack pulled out another document and placed it before her. This is a DNA test from Acme Labs. It compares samples from me, Lucas and Sophie. The results conclusively show that while Lucas and Sophie are siblings, neither of them is biologically related to me. So Julie, tell me who is their father. Julie's hands shook. You are. Jack, little when I was in the first, or years, or second. She stammered, tears pooling in her eyes. Jack's gaze hardened. Don't lie to me. Julie. Not anymore. He took a deep breath and gestured toward the laptop on the table. Let me show you something, he said, clicking play on the video file. Julie's face drained of color as the footage rolled. The recording left no room for ambiguity. It captured her and Al during their recent rendezvous, their words and actions. Damning. How did you get this? Julie stammered, her voice quivering. That's not the question. Jack shot back. The real question is why you and Ryan conspired to defraud me. You both admitted in this video that Ryan is the biological father of Lucas and Sophie. You knowingly and willingly put my name on their birth certificates. That's fraud. Julie, her face contorted with anger. Fine, she snapped. I wanted Al's children. Not yours. Yes, I signed the certificates, naming you as their father. It was my decision. Jack's voice dropped icy and controlled. It's not your right to commit fraud. What did you tell your co-workers about your relationship with Ryan? That's none of your business. She spat. Do you know Megan Blackstone? Jack pressed. Yes, Julie replied. Turly. Do you recall what you told her about our marriage? Julie hesitated. I might have told her we had an open marriage, she muttered. But that wasn't true. Was it? Jack said, leaning forward. No, Julie admitted, reluctantly. And what else did you tell her? I said, you are injured. Julie mumbled. Injured how? Jack asked that you were injured on duty and couldn't perform sexually. Julie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack leaned back, his expression stony. So you lied to justify your affair and you didn't stop there. You told others the same thing. Julie dropped her head, unable to meet his gaze. Yes, she whispered. Jack exhaled, pushing back his chair. I think we're done here. He nodded to Laura, who stood and handed Emily manila envelope. Julie Thompson. You've been served, Laura said formally. Julie blinked in confusion as the weight of the moment sank in. What is this? She asked. Divorce papers, Jack said coldly. On the grounds of infidelity and fraud. Laura's voice turned firmer. Please stand, Mrs. Thompson. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Julie's head snapped up. What? Why, you're under arrest for 2 counts of paternity, fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud, Laura said, producing a pair of handcuffs. This can't be happening, Julie cried, panic overtaking her. Oh, it's happening, Jack said. Fraud is a felony in this state. I suggest you get a lawyer, as Laura led Julie to the patrol car. Julie turned, her face streaked with tears. Jack, please, she sobbed. I love you. Jack shook his head, his voice devoid of emotion. If this is love, I'd hate to see what you do. If you didn't care. He watched as Laura drove away, leaving him standing alone. This happened when I was in the first or second year at junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Relief washed over him. It came with a deep sense of loss. For over 20 years, he had loved Julie. Now he had to face their children and explain the unimaginable betrayal that had torn their family apart. Jack arrived at Susan and Robert's house later that morning, his laptop in hand. When Susan opened the door, her face was tight with worry. Jack, what's going on? She asked. It's time to explain, he said grimly. Where are the kids? In the backyard, Susan replied. I'll bring them in minutes later. Everyone was gathered in the living room. Robert, Julie's father, looked at Jack expectantly. What's this about? Son, where is Julie? Jack drew a steadying breath. She's in county jail. Robert's eyes widened. What for? Jack glanced at Lucas and Sophie. His heart breaking. What I'm about to tell you will hurt. But you deserve the truth. Looking at the children, he continued, your mother. She lied to me. She lied to all of us. I'm not your biological father. Sophie gasped. That's not true. You're our dad. Jack's voice softened. I raised you. I love you. But biologically, I'm not your father. The room fell into a stunned silence. Continued. His voice steady. Before I met your mother, she was engaged to a man named Ryan Anderson. She wanted to marry him and have his children. But he made it clear he didn't want the responsibility of fatherhood. So she decided to have his children anyway. Without his commitment. Susan's face paled as recognition dawned. I remember him. Tall, blonde Scandinavian. Looking. I even have an old picture of him. She left the room and returned moments later with a photo album, flipping through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Handing the picture to Robert, she watched his expression darkened. The resemblance between Al and the children was undeniable. Jack nodded. That's him. Julie and Al worked together to list me as the father on your birth certificates. Fully aware it wasn't true. Lucas frowned. Wait. So mom's in jail because she cheated on you now? Jack explained firmly. She's in jail for paternity fraud. When she signed those birth certificates, she committed a felony. It's a serious crime in this state. Sophie's lip quivered. What happens to us now? Are we going to lose you too? Jack leaned forward, his voice softening. Never, sweetheart. I've already petitioned for custody of both of you. I may not be your biological father, but I raised you and I've loved you both. Every single day of your lives. I'm not going anywhere. Sophie broke down, rushing into Jack's arms. I love you, Daddy, she sobbed. Lucas stood frozen for a moment, then walked over, tears streaming down his face. Am I still your son? He asked quietly. Jack pulled him into the embrace. Of course. You are. Okay? Always be my son. The three of them held each other tightly, their tears mingling as they found strength in their bond. I love you, Dad, Lucas said. I love you too, son, Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. We can get through this together. Robert cleared his throat, breaking the silence. What happens to Julie? Now she's being held in county jail, Jack said. The DA is pursuing charges, and they're working to extradite, trying to face conspiracy charges as well. Julie may call you from jail. Susan's face fell. What if she's released on bail? She might have to stay here, Jack said, calmly. But I've already packed her belongings. They're in the garage. Just then, the phone rang, cutting through the tense atmosphere. All eyes turned to it. Susan answered, her voice firm. She greeted her daughter. Julie's frantic and tearful voice echoed faintly through the receiver. It took Susan several moments to calm her enough to speak. Julie, listen to me, Susan said sternly. Jack has told us everything, and I have to say I'm deeply disappointed. If you didn't want to have Jack's children, you never should have married him. Julie's response was muffled, but Susan cut her off sharply. No excuses. You broke the law. Julie, we raised you better than this. If you're released on bail, you can stay here, but don't expect sympathy from us. The kids are staying with Jack. More muffled protests came through the line. Susan turned to Lucas and Sophie. Do you want to speak with your mother? The children exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening. No way, they shouted in unison. Jack and Robert couldn't help but laugh softly at their bold response. Susan turned back to the phone. I'm sorry, Julie, but they're not ready to talk to you. Maybe after they've had time to process this. We'll look into finding you a lawyer. But for now, goodbye. She hung up, her lips pressing into a thin line. Robert sighed heavily. Well, she's got a lot of growing up to do. Susan softened as she looked at Jack and the kids. How about they stay here one more night? That'll give you time to settle at home. Lucas nodded and Sophie agreed. Susan turned to Jack, her eyes filled with compassion. Go home, Jack. Take care of yourself. You've been through enough. Jack hugged her tightly. Thank you, he said before shaking Robert's hand. Turning to his children, he hugged them both. I'll pick you up, Jack or Ro. I love you. We love you too, Dad, Sophie said, voice trembling with emotion. On Monday, Julie appeared in court for her arraignment. District Attorney Eric Davis argued persuasively, highlighting the gravity of her crimes and the risk of flight. The judge ordered her out without bail to prevent her from fleeing to New York to be with Elf. 3 months later, Julie's trial concluded. A jury found her guilty of 2 counts of paternity fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison with parole eligibility. After 6, her company terminated her employment. Following the verdict, Ryan was extradited and convicted on similar charges. He received a 5-year sentence with eligibility for parole. After 3, Jack's civil suit against Al resulted in a significant financial settlement, which Jack placed in college funds for Lucas and Sophie. The divorce was finalized soon after. Rachel's careful legal strategy ensured Julie received only 30 of their shared assets. Jack ensured those funds would be accessible to her upon her release, but neither he nor the children visited her in prison. After one romantic visit, Sophie refused to go back, and Lucas supported her decision. Life slowly returned to normal. Lucas graduated high school and joined the Marine Corps, following in Jack's footsteps as a military police officer. Jack beamed with pride, bringing Maria to Lucas's graduation ceremony, a moment that brought the family closer. Jack continued his law enforcement career, eventually being promoted to captain after his mentor retired. Despite his professional success, he showed no interest in dating, much to Sophie's frustration. One day, Sophie handed him a note. Here, she said, grinning mischievously. Miss Harris, my English teacher wants to meet you. Jack raised an eyebrow. Isn't one of your matchmaking schemes? Is it? Who? Me, Sophie replied, innocently. The next day, Jack met Miss Harris, who greeted him warmly. When their hands met, he felt a spark he hadn't felt in years. Call me Brenda, she said with a smile. And you must be Captain Thompson. Jack. Yet, Sophie said. You wanted to see me. She may have exaggerated, Brenda said playfully. But it's nice to meet the father of one of my favorite students. I hear you're single. Jack chuckled nervously. Sophie likes to meddle. Are you? Brenda's eyes twinkled. I am. Maybe we should let her meddle. A little. Jack grinned. Dinner. Brenda nodded. Let on. See where this goes. For the first time in years, Jack felt hope for a new beginning. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.